We are afraid of our own daughter. That's a sentence my mother wrote out by hand, in blue ink, on a county court form, and then raised her right hand and swore to in front of a judge. My father swore to it too. Both of them, under oath, on a Friday afternoon in July. I know the exact words because I've read them about 400 times since, and because I was sitting 9 feet away when they said them out loud, and because that same morning, that same Friday morning, 4 hours before my mother told a courtroom she was frightened of me, I had driven my father to his dialysis appointment. I'd carried his bag in. I'd filled his thermos. I know he takes it light with 2 sugars because I'm the one who's known that for 4 years. My name is Margaret Halloran. Everybody but my mother calls me Meg. I'm 39 years old. I keep the books for 2 small businesses out on Route 9, and on the 10th of July, my parents asked a judge to put a legal wall between me and them so their son could move home without me in the picture. I didn't argue. I didn't cry in that courtroom. I want that on the record early, because I know how these stories are supposed to go, and mine doesn't go that way. I sat still. I let them do it, because I already knew what my mother had done. I just didn't know she'd done it in her own handwriting. Now I have to tell you about a book. It's a black composition book, the marbled kind, the kind that costs $1, the kind a kid takes to school. My mother has kept one for 2 years. I've watched her write in it at her own kitchen table with her reading glasses down her nose. She keeps it in the drawer under the telephone. And once, when I asked her what it was, she put her hand flat on top of it and told me it was just her notes. That book has 40 entries in it. 40. Each one dated. Each one timed. Each one in the neat Catholic school cursive she's had her whole life. The same hand that wrote my name on my lunch bags. The same hand that signed my birthday cards, Love Mom. She labeled it Exhibit A. She attached it to the petition. She was proud of it. She thought it was the thing that would win. I'm not going to tell you what's written in those 40 entries. Not yet. I need you to walk up on it the slow way I did. The way that whole courtroom did. 1 entry at a time. Until a judge stopped reading and looked up at her over his glasses and asked her a question she could not answer. So come sit with me a minute. Bring your coffee. This one takes both hands. I keep the porch light on for the nights the house is too quiet. And if you've ever been the one who shows up, the one who does the driving and the groceries and the gutters and never once got thanked for it, then pull the door shut. Because you already know some of what I'm about to say, and I'd rather say it to you than to anybody who doesn't. Here's my question for the comments, and I want the real answer, not the pretty one. Has anybody in your family ever taken the thing you did out of love and written it down as a thing you did to them? Has anybody ever kept a book on you? Because my mother kept one on me for 2 years, and she thought it was going to bury me. If this finds you tonight, do me the small thing. Like it if you're staying. Subscribe so the next one comes and finds you. And drop me your town and what time it is where you are. I like knowing who's out there in the dark with me. Now let me put you in the passenger seat. On the last ordinary Saturday I had, 20 days before a judge said my name. Oh, the 20th of June, 20 days before the hearing. Though nobody had told me yet that there was going to be a hearing, and the clock was already running under me the way a clock does when someone else said it. 2 in the afternoon. 90 degrees and my mother's kitchen smelling like it always smells. Like coffee and lemon dish soap and something underneath it I've never been able to name. That just means her. I let myself in. I still had a key then. That matters later, so hold on to it. I had 4 bags of groceries and I set them on the counter and started putting them away. Because I know that kitchen better than my own. The soup goes in the low cabinet. The good coffee up high where my father can't get at it and cheat on his fluid limits. My father's on dialysis 3 days a week. Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And there's a whole science to what a man on dialysis is allowed to drink. And I am the one in this family who learned it. I read the pamphlets. I wrote his numbers down. My mother was at the table with her book open and her glasses on. She didn't get up. She watched me put her groceries away the way you'd watch a stranger's dog come into your yard. Not alarmed. Exactly. Just noting it. You didn't have to do that, she said. I was already at the store. I have Danny for that now. I stopped with a can of soup in my hand. Danny is my brother. He's 44. He'd flown in from Phoenix 2 days before with his life in 4 suitcases, because his marriage was over and his job was over. And my mother had already decided that this was the answer to a prayer instead of what it actually was, which is a grown man with nowhere to go. Danny was asleep upstairs at 2 in the afternoon in my old bedroom, which had been turned into his the way the whole house had always, quietly, been turned into his. Okay, I said. That's good. That'll be a big help for you. And I finished putting the groceries away, because the groceries were already bought and a man still needed to eat. And while I did it, my mother wrote something in her book. I saw her do it. I want you to picture it, because I've had a lot of nights to picture it. Her daughter is 15 feet away stocking her pantry, and she is writing in a book. And she does not think there is anything strange about doing both of those things at the same time. I thought she was writing a grocery list. I actually thought, this is true. I thought, good. She's making a list. Maybe she's finally letting somebody help. That was the 20th of June. I've since seen what she wrote that day. I'll get to it. It's entry 38. Let me tell you the thing about my mother. And then I'll stop explaining her. Because you can't explain a person like this to somebody who didn't grow up under her. You can only show you her. And I'm going to show you her. She never once raised her voice at me in my life. Not once. Everything she ever did to me, she did gently. And she did it wrapped in something that looked so much like care that you'd have had to be standing exactly where I was standing for exactly 39 years to see the shape of it. She says, sweetheart, the way other people say, as I already told you. And she only ever called me Margaret, my whole first name, the one nobody uses, when she'd already decided something about me and was just waiting for me to catch up. Sweetheart was the thing she gave me. Margaret was the thing she did to me. That Saturday, on my way out, she called me Margaret. She was still at the table. She took her glasses off, which she does when she wants you to know a real thing is coming. And she folded her hands on top of the black book. And she said it warm. That's what I need you to understand about all of this. She said it warm. Margaret, sit down a second. I sat. I write it all down, she said, and she patted the cover of the book. Twice. Gentle, the way you'd pat a Bible. Not to be cruel, so that when you finally tell your version, and you will, you always do, the truth will be sitting right there beside it. I said I didn't have a version. And my mother smiled at me and put her glasses back on and said, everybody's got a version, sweetheart. I just keep mine where I can find it. I drove home. I'd like to tell you that landed in me like a stone, that I sat in the driveway and knew. I didn't. She'd been saying things like that my whole life. It landed the way weather lands. You don't flinch at the weather you were raised in. 9 days later, a sheriff's deputy came to the office out on Route 9 where I do the books, and he was very polite about it. And he handed me a manila envelope with my whole name on it, Margaret Ann Halloran, and inside it was a petition for an order of protection, and my mother's book, photocopied, 40 pages of it, stamped at the bottom of every single page, Exhibit A. The hearing was set for the 10th of July, 11 days. I want you to hold that number the way I had to, because everything I'm about to tell you happens inside those 11 days. And at the end of them, my mother stood up in a courtroom and read her own handwriting into the record and did not understand, until it was much too late, what she had actually written down. I read the whole thing standing at my kitchen counter, still in the clothes I'd worn to drive my father to dialysis that morning. The petition part is a form. You check boxes. My mother had checked the box that said the respondent. That's me. I'm the respondent. I had to learn a whole language that week. Had committed acts that placed the petitioners in reasonable fear of bodily harm. And then there's a line, a blank line, where the form says, describe the incidents. Attach additional pages if necessary. My mother attached 40 pages. In her own hand. She could have typed it. She's got a computer. She does the parish bulletin on it. She chose to write it out. All of it. Longhand. Because to my mother, a thing isn't real until it's in her handwriting. And because, and this is the part I only understood later, standing in a courtroom, she was proud of it. She thought the 40 pages were the proof. She thought a judge would look at 40 dated entries in a mother's careful hand and see a woman being terrorized. I read the first page and I had to sit down on my own kitchen floor. And I want to tell you what undid me, sitting there on the linoleum. Because it wasn't the words, it was the handwriting. I would know my mother's handwriting anywhere on this earth. It's the hand that wrote my name on brown paper lunch bags for 12 years of school. It's the hand on every birthday card I ever got. Love. Mom. And on the mass cards when people died. And on the labels of the freezer meals she left the one time I was in the hospital. It's a careful hand. She learned it from nuns and she never let it go. Little serifs on the capitals. She crosses her sevens like a European. And here was that same hand, that exact hand. The loops and the crossed sevens, spelling out that her daughter was a danger to her. Came uninvited. The same pen she'd sign a sympathy card with. It is a strange and specific grief. To recognize the handwriting of the person accusing you, to see all that care in the letters and understand the care was never for you. It was only ever how she was taught to write. I ran my thumb over one of the entries without meaning to. The way you touch a bruise to see if it's still there. The ink didn't smear. She'd let it dry. My mother always lets a thing dry before she puts it away. I'm not going to give you the entries yet. I promised you that, and I mean it. But I'll tell you what happened in my chest. Because you've maybe felt it. I read my mother's handwriting describing me as a danger. And my body did the thing it does. Which is, get very calm and very cold and very good with a spreadsheet. That's who I am. That's who I've always been. When the world tips over, I reach for a pen. Under the sworn statement there were 2 signatures. Eleanor M. Halloran. And under it, in the shakier hand of a man whose kidneys are killing him, my father, Gene Halloran. He'd signed it. He'd sworn it. He was afraid of me too. It said, right there, in the eyes of the state of, right there in the eyes of the law. I put my father on a chair in a dialysis center 3 times a week. I'd done it that very morning, and he'd signed a paper that said he lived in fear of me. I want to tell you what I did next, because I've replayed it, and I'm not proud of the shape of it. I didn't call a lawyer. I didn't call Danny. I got in my car and I drove to my parents' house at 9 o'clock at night to give my mother her key back. That was a mistake. I know that now. But I want you to see why I did it. Because it's the whole of who they made me. I read a legal document accusing me of being frightening. And my first instinct, my very first one, was to prove I wasn't frightening. To make myself smaller. To hand back the key so nobody would ever be able to say, I let myself in again. I didn't get to hand it to my mother. Danny answered the door. My brother. In my father's bathrobe. In the house I keep stocked. and he stood in the doorway so I couldn't come in. And he said, "Meg, you really shouldn't be here. I came to give Mom her key." "You can't be here," he said, and he actually looked over his shoulder, toward the kitchen, where I could see the light on and my mother not coming out. You got the papers, right? You're not supposed to be here." "There's no order yet. Danny, it's a hearing. I read the whole thing. There's nothing stopping me standing on this porch." And my brother, who I taught to drive, who I covered for 100 times, looked at me with real discomfort. The discomfort of a man who would like the difficult thing to please go away on its own. And he said the thing that I think is the truest thing anybody in my family said that whole month. It's easier if you don't, okay? For everybody. It's just easier. Behind him, my mother's shadow crossed the kitchen wall and did not come to the door. And my father was in his chair in the front room. I could see the blue light of the television on the side of his face. And he did not get up. And he did not turn his head. And I stood on the porch of the house I had spent 4 years keeping alive, and I understood that not one person inside it was going to come and stand next to me. So I put the key on the porch rail. I didn't throw it. I set it down. Careful. The way you set down something that mattered. "Tell Mom the soup's the low sodium," I said. "He's not supposed to have the other kind." And I drove home. That was the 29th of June, and Mrs. Pruitt from next door was out with her little dog. And she saw the whole thing. A woman setting her own house key on the rail and being turned away by a man in a bathrobe. And I lifted my hand to her, and she pretended she hadn't seen. Which is its own kind of mercy. And that was the last night I could still tell myself this was a misunderstanding. Because a misunderstanding, you can fix by being reasonable. I'd just tried being reasonable. I'd given back the key. And I want you to notice what it cost me, because I didn't notice till later. The key was how I got in to leave the soup. The key was how I checked on him when he didn't answer the phone. I'd handed away the last thing that let me take care of my father. And I'd done it to prove I was safe. And it hadn't bought me 1 inch. 10 days now. I got a lawyer the next morning, because Aunt Kath made me. Aunt Kath is my mother's younger sister. And she is the one adult in my whole childhood who ever looked at me and seemed to actually see me standing there. She calls me Meggie. She lives 40 minutes away, and she and my mother have one of those sister things where they talk every Sunday and haven't really liked each other since 1974. I called her because I didn't know who else to call. And I got about 4 words out before I started doing the thing I don't do. And she said, "Stop. Stop crying. Meggie, listen to me. Do you have a lawyer?" I said no. "You get a lawyer today. Today. Do you understand me? Eleanor does not do a thing by accident. If she's put it on paper, she's been planning it since Christmas. Since Christmas. Hold that. She was righter than she knew. My lawyer was a brisk, kind woman in a strip mall office with a diploma and a dying plant. And I sat across from her and slid the 40 pages over. And I watched her read them. I watched her face. She read the first page the way you read anything. Professionally, scanning. Then she slowed down. Then she stopped scanning and started reading. And she turned a page, and turned another. And somewhere around the 10th page she looked up at me over the top of the paper, and she said, very carefully, like a woman checking whether a bridge will hold her weight, "Meg, these incidents, is this accurate? Did these things happen?" And I said yes. "All of them?" "Everyone," I said. "The dates are right. She's very accurate. She was always very accurate." And my lawyer put the pages down on her desk, and she squared them up with 2 fingers. And she was quiet for a second. And then she said a thing I'll keep the rest of my life. She said, Your mother has just handed me the best character reference I have ever read, and she doesn't know it. I didn't understand yet. I want to be honest about that. I was still at the stage of this thing where I thought it was about whether the judge would believe I was dangerous. I thought I was going to have to defend myself. I sat in that office and asked my lawyer how I was going to prove I hadn't done the things in the book. And she took her glasses off. Everyone in my life takes their glasses off before they tell me the real thing. And she said, "Meg, you're not listening. We're not going to say you didn't do them. We're going to ask her to read them out loud." She squared the pages up and set them down. And then she said the thing that kept me up for the next 11 days. "There's only one way we lose this. If they get smart before the hearing and pull this exhibit. If anyone advising your mother tells her to withdraw the book and just get up on that stand and testify vague and frightened. No dates. No specifics. Nothing I can put a finger on. Then it's her word against yours. And judges get careful with mothers who cry." 40 dated entries in her own hand is the best gift a respondent ever walked in holding. 3 vague ones. And we've got a real fight. She looked at me over the glasses. "So between now and the 10th. Meg, you had better pray your mother stays proud of her book. I want you to hold that. Because it's the thread the whole thing hung by for 11 days. The one move left that could still bury me was my mother getting humble about her own handwriting. Someone talking her into shrinking that book down to 3 safe lies. And if you have ever met a woman like my mother, you already know the odds on her choosing 3 lies over 40 proud true things she stayed up nights getting exactly right. But I didn't know them yet. So I spent 11 days afraid of the one mercy that was never coming, that she might, for once, make herself smaller. There's one of the 40 I keep coming back to, and I want to give it to you now, as a scene, the way it happened. Before you hear a judge read it back cold, because you should see it in color first. Number 19, Last Christmas Eve. By last Christmas, I wasn't welcome in the house anymore. It had never been said out loud. Nothing in my family is ever said out loud. But I'd stopped being told when things were. And on Christmas Eve, I'd called, and my mother had said they were keeping it small this year. Which is a sentence that means you're not coming. So I made the ham anyway. I don't know if you've ever cooked a holiday for people who won't open the door to you. I don't recommend it, and I'd do it again. I did the whole thing, the brown sugar and the cloves and the pineapple the way my father likes it. And I drove it over at 4 in the afternoon on Christmas Eve in the cold. And the windows were lit, and I could see them moving around in there. Danny's rental already in the driveway. And I did not knock. I couldn't stand the porch again. I set the ham on the step. Still warm, wrapped in a dish towel to hold the heat. And I put a card on it that said, "Merry Christmas, Dad. Love, Meg." And I got back in my car and drove home and ate a sandwich standing up at my own counter. And my mother carried that ham inside and served it. And they ate it. Aunt Kath told me later they ate every bit. My father had 2 helpings. And then, sometime that night, after the dishes, my mother took out her black book and her good pen and she wrote, "December 24th, left a ham on the porch. 19 of 40. That's what was in the book. That's what she believed would frighten a judge. She even did it at church." That one's entry 31. And when I read it, I remembered the exact Sunday, St. Bridget's, the 10 o'clock, a cold morning in February. I'd shoveled their walk before Mass. That's a different entry. 26. Same morning. And then I'd gone to Mass myself. And the church was full. And I slid into the pew where my parents were sitting because it was the only open space. And because they are my parents. And it is church. And where else on earth would I sit? My mother went stiff beside me. I felt it. I have felt that particular stiffness my whole life, and I always read it as her being holy, concentrating on the liturgy. We stood, and we sat, and we knelt, the three of us in a row. And I shared my father's missal because he'd forgotten his reading glasses. And at the sign of peace, my mother took my hand and shook it, and said, "Peace be with you," without quite looking at me. And I thought that was only her way. And that afternoon she went home and wrote it down, sat too close to me in the pew. She sat in the house of God and passed me the peace, and then drove home and logged me as a threat for being in the next 6 inches of a public pew. That's when I understood there was no line. There was nowhere I could put myself that wouldn't go in the book. Groceries went in the book. The ham went in the book. Peace be with you went in the book. I could have fallen off the edge of the earth, and the only thing that would have stopped is the writing. Here is where I almost ended it. I need to tell you this part, because it's the part I'm least proud of and the part that matters most. 3 days before the hearing, opposing side sent over an offer. Except there wasn't really an opposing side. My parents didn't have a lawyer. My mother had a man from the parish who does wills look the petition over, and that was it. So the offer came through the court's own mediator, a tired woman in a beige room who does this all day and just wants everybody to go home. The offer was a consent order. Let me tell you what a consent order is, in this. Because it's built exactly to catch a person like me. You both agree to stay away from each other. No hearing, no testimony, no judge deciding anything, nobody's found guilty, nobody's found innocent. No findings, they call it, mutual. You both just sign a paper that says the two of you will leave each other alone, and it's over in 20 minutes. And everybody goes home, and the black book goes back in the drawer under the telephone and is never opened in public by anybody. Ever. My own lawyer told me to take it. It's the safe play, she said. And she meant it kindly. A hearing is a risk. Judges are people. They have bad days. You sign this. You walk out clean. No order against you. No finding. Nothing on your record. It's a smart move. Meg. 90% of these end here and everybody's better for it. And God help me, I wanted to. I want you to understand how much I wanted to. I am not a person who wants a fight. I'm a person who puts the soup in the low cabinet so it's easier for everybody. My whole life is making things easier for everybody. And here was a beige room and a tired, kind woman offering me the easiest thing in the world. Sign here. And all of this stops. And you never have to sit in a courtroom while your mother calls you frightening. I had the pen in my hand. And I asked one question. I asked it because I'm a bookkeeper and I read everything all the way to the bottom. And I asked the mediator, "This mutual stay away, does that mean I can't have contact with my father?" She checked. She said yes. Mutual meant both petitioners, both parents, no contact. So I couldn't drive him to dialysis. No, she said. Not while the order's in place. He'd have to make other arrangements. Other arrangements. I sat in that beige room, and I thought about my father in a chair with a needle in his arm 3 days a week. And I thought about who was going to drive him, Danny. Who slept till 2? My mother. Who won't drive on the highway? And I thought about the other arrangements, which is a phrase that means a sick old man sits in a lobby waiting for a medical van that comes when it comes. And I understood. Finally. Sitting there with the pen in my hand, exactly what the safe play cost. If I signed, I'd be free and clean and my father would be alone. If I signed, the black book would go back in the drawer, and there would be no finding, no judge, nothing, but also no record, anywhere, ever, of the truth. My mother would get her wall. She'd get me legally away. She'd get mutual, which lets her tell the whole parish that it was 6 of 1, that we'd agreed to disagree. Poor Eleanor and her difficult daughter. She'd get everything she wanted, and it would look reasonable, and it would be sealed. I put the pen down. I'm not signing it, I said. My lawyer said, Meg, I want the hearing. I want a judge to read it. And I want to tell you I said that because I was brave. But I wasn't brave. I said it because of dialysis. I said it because I would not, could not, sign a piece of paper that made me stop taking care of my father. Even after he'd signed one that said he was scared of me. That's the whole reason. Not principle. Not strategy. He takes it light with 2 sugars. Somebody had to keep driving him. It was always going to be me. That was the safe door, and I closed it. 7 days left. I need to tell you why they really did it. Because I didn't know either until Aunt Kath sat me down at her own kitchen table with the good tea out, and told me the thing my mother would never say. It was never about fear. I want to say that as plainly as I can, because for a while I tortured myself trying to figure out what I'd done that scared them. Going back through 2 years looking for the moment I became frightening. And there isn't one. Because fear was never in it. It was about the record. Danny was home for good. Broke, divorced, 44. Home in his childhood bedroom. And my mother had made a decision. The way she makes all her decisions. Quietly. Completely. And long before anybody else knows there's a decision being made. Danny was going to have the house. Danny was going to have what there was to have. And there was a problem with that plan. And the problem was me. Not because I'd ever asked for anything. I hadn't. I never once asked them for a dime or a deed or a promise. The problem was worse than that. The problem was that I was a witness. As long as I was the one filling the thermos and driving to dialysis and leaving the ham on the porch, everybody could see. The whole parish could see. Aunt Kath could see. Which daughter showed up. Which child actually did the work. And a woman who intends to leave everything to the son who did nothing cannot afford a witness like that standing in the kitchen every Saturday. Quietly. Being good. So you don't get rid of the witness by asking her to leave. She won't leave. That's the whole problem with her. She keeps showing up. You get rid of the witness by discrediting her. You get a court. A real court. With a seal and a judge, to put its stamp on a version of her where she's unstable, where she's frightening, where she had to be kept away. And then, forever after, when she tells people what she did for this family, there's a legal document that says, consider the source. She's the one we had the order against. That's what Aunt Kath told me, stirring her tea, not looking at me. She doesn't want you gone. Meggie, she said. She wants you not to count. There's a difference. And the difference is the rest of your life. I sat with that. They didn't want me away from them. They wanted me discredited so that my version never counted again. The restraining order wasn't a wall. It was an eraser. My mother wasn't trying to keep me out of the house. She was trying to write me out of the family. In a hand the state would notarize, so that when the wills were read and the parish talked, and my father finally died, the story was already fixed, and I wasn't in it. I did the arithmetic that night. Because I'm a bookkeeper, and I don't trust a feeling until I've dated it. The first entry in the book is March 9th of last year, 7 p.m. groceries, and I sat at my kitchen table with a calendar, and I found the other thing that happened last March, and it took the wind out of me. Last March is when Danny first called them about coming home. Aunt Kath pinned it down for me. He'd lost the job in February. In March, he floated it. Moving back, and in March, the 9th, 7 in the evening, a bag of groceries. My mother opened a black composition book and started keeping score. She didn't start the book because I did something. She started the book because Danny needed a room. The documentation and the golden sun arrived in the very same month. And it took a bookkeeper's calendar and 39 years for me to see that they were never two things. They were one thing. And to build that, to build the case that I was frightening, She'd had to document me. For 2 years. Every visit, every kindness, every casserole, every ride. She'd sat at her kitchen table with her glasses down her nose, and she'd written down, in dated detail, 40 separate times that her daughter came to the house and did something. She built the eraser out of the only material she had. And the only material she had was 2 years of me loving them. Do you see it yet? I didn't. Not till the courtroom. She thought she was writing 40 proofs that I was dangerous. What she was actually doing, with her own hand, dated, sworn, notarized, entered into the permanent public record of the county, was writing the single most complete account that will ever exist of exactly what kind of daughter I was. She was keeping score. I want you to sit with that word. Because it's my mother's whole method, and it's the hinge of this entire thing. She was keeping score. I wasn't. I was just showing up. And when it was over, her scorebook was going to be the thing that proved she'd been counting the whole time, counting my kindnesses, and calling them crimes. If you've ever been the one who shows up, the reliable one, the one nobody thanks, the one they can always count on and never seem to like, then do me a favor. Somewhere in this family, in a drawer, there's a book with your name in it too, whether it's on paper or not. So tell me, what's your entry 41? The last thing you did for them that they'll someday hold against you. Put it in the comments. I read them at night. And I'll tell you next time how many of us there turned out to be. 6 days, then 5. Then the phone calls started. In those 11 days, I called the house exactly once, and I'll tell you about it. Because it's small, and it's the whole marriage. I called to check his fluid numbers. That's all. He'd had a bad week right before all this. His weight was up between sessions. And I am the one who tracks that. Order or no order. So I called the landline to ask what the scale said that morning. My mother answered. Halloran residence, like a receptionist. Mom, it's me. I just need Dad's weight from this morning. The tech wanted me to... He's resting, Margaret. It's a number. Mom, 10 seconds. Is he over 85? And there was a pause. And then my mother said, in the warm voice, the funeral and the bishop voice, I don't think it's appropriate for us to be talking right now, sweetheart. Not with everything pending. You understand. And she hung up. Gently. She hung up gently on a question about whether her own husband was carrying enough extra fluid to be in danger. Because talking to me wasn't appropriate with everything pending, everything that she had set pending. On purpose. With a book. I called the dialysis center directly and gave them his numbers from memory. They already had me on his contact list. They've had me on his contact list for 4 years. Nobody ever told the contact list about the book. Danny called me on the 8th, 2 days before. I almost didn't pick up. I'm glad I did. Because it's the only time in this whole story my brother told me something true, and he didn't even know he was doing it. He was uncomfortable. Danny's always uncomfortable now. It's his whole personality since he came home. A man vaguely embarrassed to be exactly where he chose to be. He called to ask me, and I want you to hear the nerve of this. He called to ask me if I could just not make it a whole thing at the hearing. For Mom, for Dad's health. Because Dad shouldn't be stressed. With his heart. I said, Danny, they're the ones who filed. I know they did. It's just, Mom's really worked herself up over it. She's been up every night with that notebook of hers. He laughed a little. The way you laugh at a relative's harmless quirk. The guy from church told her she should cut it down, you know? Said 40 was too many. Said just pick the 3 worst and keep it simple. And she about took his head off. She was up till 2 redoing it. Making sure every date was right. She's got dates on everything. Meg. She's very She's thorough. I stood in my kitchen holding the phone and I closed my eyes. The man from the parish had told her to cut it down. Pick the 3 worst. Keep it simple. And any halfway decent liar would have 3 vague, frightening incidents. No dates, no detail. Easy to say and hard to check. That's the petition that might have worked. 3 scary blurs. And my mother refused. Because my mother is not a liar. That's the thing nobody believes about her. She genuinely could not stand to submit an incomplete record. Her pride is her precision. She'd rather hand a judge 40 true, dated, exculpatory entries than 3 false vague ones, because the 40 were real and the 3 would have been made up. And my mother does not make things up. She keeps score. Accurately. To the day. She'd been given the chance to make her weapon smaller and deadlier. And she'd stayed up till 2 in the morning making it bigger and truer instead. Because being thorough was the whole of how she saw herself. "Meg," Danny said, "you there?" "I'm here." "So you'll keep it calm? For Dad?" And I said, "I'm always calm. Danny, you know that about me." He said, "Yeah." He said, "Thanks." He said, "You're being real mature about this." Which is a sentence. And then he hung up to go back to the house I could no longer enter. And I stood there and I understood that my mother had just, with her own stubbornness, loaded the gun and handed it to the judge, and there was nothing left for me to do but show up and let her fire it. The night before, I didn't sleep much. I'll tell you what I did instead. I got out my own notebook. Not a black composition book, a little spiral one, the kind that fits in a car visor. And mine doesn't have my mother's grievances in it. Mine has my father's dialysis schedule, and his dry weight, and the times of his medications, and the number of the renal social worker, all in my handwriting, because I'm the one who wrote it all down, the actual caretaking of an actual dying man, in a notebook the size of my hand. 2 women in one family, both of us keeping books. Hers was a ledger of everything I did wrong. Mine was a ledger of when my father takes his heart pills. I put mine in my purse for the morning. I don't know why. I think I wanted something of my own handwriting in that room, to sit against hers. Oh. The hearing was the 10th of July, a Friday, a dialysis day. So I did what I do on dialysis days. I got up at 5:30, and I drove to my parents' house, and I did not use a key because I didn't have one anymore. I knocked, and Danny opened the door and would not look at me, and stepped back to let my father come out. Because here's the thing about the other arrangements. There weren't any. Danny wasn't going to get up at 5:30. My mother wasn't going to drive the highway. The medical van was a 2-hour ordeal my father hated. So even now, even the literal morning of the hearing where they would swear I terrified them, when it came to the actual question of who was going to get a sick old man to the chair on time, the answer was the same as it had always been. Me. My father came out in his good shirt, because he had court later, and he had his bag, and he got in my car, and I handed him his thermos, light, 2 sugars, and I pulled out of the driveway. And for 11 minutes, neither of us said a word. I want to give you this drive, because it's the center of the whole thing, and because I keep it now the way you keep a stone in your pocket. He looked out the window. His hands were folded in his lap over the bag. My father has big hands that used to fix everything in our house, and now shake when he holds a coffee cup. And they were folded. And he watched the town go by, and about halfway there, without turning his head, he said, "Roads are quiet this early." And I said, "They are." That's it. That's the whole conversation. That's the most my father could give me on the morning he was going to court to swear he was afraid of me. An observation about traffic, offered sideways, to the windshield. But I've thought about it 1,000 times since. And I've decided it was the closest thing to an apology that man had in him. And I've decided to let it be one. Because he could have taken the van. He didn't have to get in my car. And he got in my car. I dropped him at the door of the dialysis center and I said I'd see him at the courthouse, which is a sentence I never in my life expected to say, and he nodded. And he took his bag. And he went in to have his blood cleaned by a machine, so he'd be strong enough to sit in a room and testify against the person who drove him there. And I sat in the parking lot of a dialysis center at 6:15 in the morning, and I did not cry. And I got out my little spiral notebook and I wrote down the time he went in. Because it was a dialysis day. And that's what I do on dialysis days. I picked him up at 10. He was gray and tired the way he always is after. I got him home. My mother met us at the door in her navy dress, the one she wears for funerals and for the bishop. And she looked at me standing on the porch holding my father's arm. And she said, "Warm. So warm. You have no idea how warm. Thank you. Margaret, we'll take him from here. We'll take him from here, as if there were a we that had ever once done the taking." I said, "The hearing's at 1:30. "I know when it is, sweetheart," my mother said. "I'm the one who scheduled it." And she closed the door. I got to the courthouse at 1. I sat in my car in the lot for 20 minutes, the way I'd sat in the dialysis lot that same morning. Because it turns out my whole life is sitting in parking lots, gathering myself before I go and do a hard thing for these people. I had the little spiral notebook in my purse. I took it out and held it. My handwriting, his times, his weights, and then I put it back. And I went in. The hallway outside the courtroom is where a thing like this turns real. My parents were already there on a bench, my mother in the navy dress, my father beside her still in his good shirt, gray from the morning's session, and the parish man with a folder, and Danny in a tie he'd clearly borrowed, and down the same bench, not sitting with them, in a little separate clump, sat the 2 Altar Society women and Aunt Kath and old Mrs. Pruitt from next door. All of them dressed for church. Because to my family, a courthouse and a church are the same kind of building. You wear the navy. You sit up straight. You go to receive the verdict. Nobody spoke to me. My father looked at his own shoes. My mother looked at me once, a long, warm, patient look, and then leaned and murmured something to the parish man. And I watched him nod. And I understood that even here, even now, in the last 10 minutes she was still working the room. Then a clerk opened the door and read the case number with my whole name inside it, Margaret Ann Halloran, out loud into a public hallway. And we all stood and filed in like a congregation. The courtroom was smaller than you'd think. They always are. It wasn't the kind with the high bench and the flags you see on television. It was a plain municipal room with fluorescent lights and chairs that scraped. And a judge named Prentice, who was maybe 70, with reading glasses and the unhurried patience of a man who has heard every family in the county explain itself. I sat with my lawyer on one side, my parents sat on the other, with the man from the parish who does wills, and Danny behind them in the second row. And behind Danny, this is the part my mother did not plan for, and it's the part that turned a legal proceeding into the thing it became. Behind Danny sat Aunt Kath, and 2 women from the St. Bridget's Altar Society who'd come to support my mother, and old Mrs. Pruitt from next door who'd seen me set my key on the rail, and a cousin or 2, because in my family, a public event is a public event, and people come. My mother had told the parish she was finally standing up to her difficult daughter, and the parish had come to watch her be brave. They came to watch. Hold that. They came to watch. And my mother let them. Because she was proud of her book. And she had no idea what was actually written in it. Judge Prentice had the file. He'd read it. You could tell he'd read it. The way he handled it. like a man who already knew how the movie ended and was just going to make everybody sit through it. He confirmed the names. He confirmed my parents were the petitioners. Both of them. And my father said, "Yes, Your Honor," in a voice like paper. And my mother said, "Yes, Your Honor," in a voice like a woman being received into a nice restaurant. And the judge said, "This is a petition for an order of protection. The petitioners allege that the respondent has placed them in reasonable fear. There's an exhibit attached. Exhibit A, a handwritten log of incidents. 40 of them." He looked over his glasses at my mother. "Mrs. Halloran, did you prepare this?" And my mother sat up straight, and I watched her whole face fill with the pride of a woman about to be told she's done a thorough job. And she said, "I did, Your Honor, every word, in my own hand. I wanted it to be complete." "You dated each entry." "I did, I don't exaggerate. Your Honor, it's all true. Every single one." I want you to remember that she said that. It's all true. Every single one. She said it to a judge. On the record. Before he'd read a word of it, she staked her whole self on the accuracy of that book. Because accuracy was the one thing my mother would never surrender. Not even to win. "All right," said Judge Prentice. "Let's go through it. I find it helps to hear these in the petitioner's own words." He settled his glasses. "I'm going to read the incidents you've listed, Mrs. Halloran, and I'd like you to tell me, for each one, what about it placed you in fear? Can you do that?" "Of course, Your Honor," my mother said, and Judge Prentice began to read her book out loud. "Entry 1, he said, March 9th, last year, 7 p.m. He read it flat, the way you read a grocery list. Came uninvited, brought groceries." He looked up. He looked up at my mother over the top of his glasses, and there was a silence in that room that I can still hear. And he said, "What about this incident placed you in fear, Mrs. Halloran?" And my mother opened her mouth. You have to understand, my mother is never not ready. My mother has an answer for the doctor and the pastor and the man at the bank. In 69 years, I had never once seen her caught without the next thing to say. And she opened her mouth to explain how a woman bringing groceries at 7 in the evening had placed her in reasonable fear of bodily harm. And what came out was, well, she didn't call first. She let herself in. She had a key? She did. She let herself in whenever she wanted. And on this occasion she brought groceries. Yes, but it was Your Honor, it was the way she did it. Like she was in charge. Like it was her house. Judge Prentice looked at her for a moment. Then he made a small note, and he went to the next page. Entry 2, April 2nd, mowed the yard without permission. He didn't even look up for that one. He just let it sit in the room. Mowed the yard without permission, and one of the Altar Society women behind Danny made a sound. Just a small one. A little intake of breath. The sound a person makes when they've just seen something they can't unsee. Entry 7. The judge read, May 1st, clean the gutters. Entry 11, October 12th, brought soup when he had the flu. Entry 19, December 24th. A pause. Left a ham on the porch. And I heard my Aunt Kath, behind me, start to cry, quietly, into a tissue, because Aunt Kath knew about the ham. Aunt Kath knew I'd left it on the porch, because by last Christmas Eve I wasn't welcome inside anymore. And I'd cooked a Christmas ham for people who wouldn't open the door to me. And I'd left it on the porch so at least they'd have Christmas dinner. And my mother had carried it into the house and eaten it, and then gone to her book and written, Left a ham on the porch, December 24th. Like it was a threat. Like a daughter's Christmas ham was something the law should protect her from. The judge kept reading. He read them slowly. I think he did it on purpose. I think Judge Prentice, who had read the whole thing the night before, knew exactly what he was doing when he chose to read it out loud instead of just ruling, because a ruling is quiet and private. And reading it out loud made it something else, made it public, made it heard. Entry 26, February 2nd, shoveled the walk before Mass. Entry 31, sat too close to me in the pew. That one he read. And then he took his glasses off, and he rubbed the bridge of his nose, and he looked at my mother for a long moment, and the whole room understood that something had gone very wrong with my mother's plan. And my mother, this is the thing, my mother still didn't. She was still sitting up straight. She still thought the length of the list was helping her. She thought the judge was moved. He put the glasses back on. He kept going. I think he had decided that the only fair thing, the only honest thing, was to read all of it, because she had sworn all of it was true. Entry 33. He turned the page, fixed the railing on the back steps so he wouldn't fall. Behind me, the parish man, the one who does the wills, the one who had told her to cut it to 3, put his hand over his mouth. He had warned her. He had known, professionally. In the narrow, careful way an estate man knows things, that 40 was far too many. And now he sat there and watched all 40 come true in a stranger's flat voice. And there was nothing left for him to do but hold his own mouth shut in a borrowed tie. Entry 36. Called on his birthday. Would not stop calling. And that one my mother tried to save. She half rose from her chair. Your Honor. That one. She called 9 times. 9 times in the one day. I have it right there. And Judge Prentice looked at her. And he said, gently, it was his birthday, Mrs. Halloran. And she sat back down. And I watched a thing happen to my mother's face that I had never once seen in 39 years. I watched her begin to understand the room, not the truth. She still didn't have the truth. She wouldn't have it for months. I'm not sure she has it yet. But the room. My mother could always feel a room. It was her one great gift. And for the first time in her life, the room had turned against her, and she could not work out why. Because in her book, she was the victim. It was all right there. All true. All dated in her own careful hand. And it was going to ash as fast as a stranger could read it aloud, and she could not understand the chemistry of it. Entry 38. June 20th. Came uninvited. Put the groceries away like she owned the place. That was the Saturday. The last ordinary Saturday. The one I put you in the passenger seat for. The soup going into the low cabinet. She had written that entry that very afternoon while I stocked her pantry. And I had looked over and thought she was making a grocery list. She was making entry 38. Danny was looking at the floor. My brother had gotten everything he flew home for. The room. The house. The will that would surely come. And he sat in the second row of that courtroom and listened to a stranger read out a list of every single thing his sister had done for the parents he came home to inherit. And he looked at the floor. And he has not looked me full in the face from that day to this one. And then he got to it. Entry 34, June 14th, drove him to dialysis. He set the paper down. Mrs. Halloran, he said, and his voice wasn't unkind, which somehow made it worse. Your husband is a dialysis patient 3 times a week, is that right? Yes, Your Honor. Who drives him? And there it was, 90 seconds. My lawyer told me later. From came uninvited, brought groceries to this, 90 seconds. That's all it took. And my mother sat in a courtroom she had built, in front of a parish she had invited. And she could not answer the question. Because there was only one answer, and the answer was me. And everybody in that room already knew it. And half of them had watched me do it for 4 years. The silence went on. Mrs. Halloran, Who drives your husband to his dialysis appointments? And my father, who had not said one word beyond yes, Your Honor. My father with his cleaned blood and his good shirt and his big shaking hands. My father said, into the quiet, not loud, but everyone heard it. She does. That's all. She does. 2 words, from the witness who was supposed to be afraid of me. And they were the truest thing anybody swore to in that room all day. And they finished it. Judge Prentice nodded slowly. He gathered the pages of Exhibit A and squared them with 2 fingers. The exact gesture my mother makes. The exact gesture I make. The family gesture. Tidying the thing that's just destroyed you. And he said, I've read all 40, Mrs. Halloran. I don't need you to explain the rest. The petition is denied. There's no order here. There's no fear here that the law can find. He looked at her. And then he looked at my father. And then he did a thing I'll never forget. He looked at me. And he gave me the smallest nod. One human being to another. And he said, Ma'am, I'm sorry you had to sit through that. And then, because he was a careful man, and it was his job, he said the sentence that turned the knife all the way, though he didn't mean it as a knife. He said, Exhibit A will be entered into the record. Into the record. My mother had wanted a record. She'd wanted a court. With a seal. To put its stamp on a version of me. And she got exactly that. She got her 40 pages entered into the permanent public record of the county. 40 dated entries. In her own hand. Sworn to be true. Every single one of them describing her daughter doing something kind. She'd built the most complete account of my devotion that will ever exist. And then she'd filed it with the government. And made it public. And read it aloud to the parish herself. She told me once she wrote it all down so that when I finally told my version, the truth would be sitting right there beside it. She was right. It was. She'd just never once read her own handwriting. I didn't say anything in that courtroom. I want you to know that. My lawyer had a whole statement ready and I never used it and I never needed it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. It was all in evidence. I have thought about why. And I'm going to be honest instead of impressive. It wasn't strength. There was nothing to say. My mother had said all of it. For 2 years. In her own hand. And then a stranger in reading glasses had said it back to her in a room full of people who loved her. And there was not one thing left for me to add. What I remember is the sound the room made afterward. Not gasps. Nothing dramatic. Just the small human noise of 30 people who'd come to watch a woman stand up to her frightening daughter, and had instead watched her read out 2 years of that daughter's kindness under oath, and now had to gather their purses and file out past both of us and figure out, forever, what to do with what they'd heard. The altar society, women went out fast, not looking at anybody. One of them touched my shoulder on the way. She didn't say anything. She just touched my shoulder. 2 fingers. Quick. And kept walking. And I've decided that was a whole apology too. And I've decided to keep it. Mrs. Pruitt from next door stopped in front of my mother. 81 years old. And she didn't say anything cruel. Mrs. Pruitt isn't cruel. She just looked at my mother for a second and then she said, quietly, Oh, Eleanor, in a voice with 40 years of neighboring in it, and my mother flinched like she'd been slapped. Because oh, Eleanor from the woman next door was the verdict that actually landed. Not the judge's, hers. And Aunt Kath came and put her arm around me and walked me out. And behind us I could hear my mother starting up. I could hear the voice climbing, the one I'd never once heard her use in public, saying to Danny, to the man from the parish, to the emptying room, that is not, He took it out of context. That judge, he read it wrong. That is not what any of that was. But you can't take a ham off a porch out of context. You can't misread drove him to dialysis. There was no context left to take it out of. She'd written it too clearly. She'd been too accurate. Her pride had made it unspinnable. That's the part that I think will keep her up. If anything keeps my mother up. Which I'm no longer sure of. It's not that she lost. It's that she can't tell anyone she was wronged, because the wrong is in her own handwriting, in the county record, where anyone can read it. Forever. She made 40 copies of my devotion and filed them with the state. And here is the thing about a public record. The thing I believe my mother is only now beginning to feel the cold edge of, it does not go away. Exhibit A has a case number. It lives in a beige folder in a beige building downtown. And it is public. Which means that any person alive who wants to, a cousin, a nosy parishioner, a grandchild not yet born, can walk in off the street, ask a clerk, pay $1 a page, and read 40 entries in my mother's own careful hand about the daughter she swore under oath she was afraid of. She wanted a document that said I was the dangerous one. What she made instead is a permanent government archive of the fact that I brought the soup, and fixed the railing, and drove him to dialysis. She notarized it. She had it stamped. She made it impossible to lose. I could not have built a monument like that if I'd worked at it for 100 years. It took my mother 2 years and $1 a page, and she did it thinking it was a grave. Here's the cascade, and it's small, and it's the only one there's going to be, and I've made my peace with that. There's nothing more legal. The petition's denied. That's the end of the legal part. Nobody goes to jail for filing a mean-spirited restraining order, and I wouldn't want them to. My father's not well enough for me to want anything to fall on that house. But the parish is a small town inside a small town, and word of a thing like that moves through it like water finding the low places. Nobody had to be told. 30 people were there. By the following Sunday, my mother, who has run the St. Bridget's Altar Society for 19 years, who does the bulletin, who took communion up the aisle like a woman carrying the ark. My mother sat in the back, by herself. She's still there, I hear, still in the back. People are kind to her. My mother's people are kind, but it's the kindness you show someone you now know something about. And my mother can feel the difference, because feeling the difference is the one thing she's always been good at. Danny's living in the house. He got what he came for. He drives Dad to dialysis on the days I don't, and Aunt Kath says he's not good at it, that he forgets the thermos and gets the schedule wrong, and I feel something about that I'm not proud of, and I'm not going to pretend I don't. My mother has not apologized. I want to be straight with you about that. The way I've tried to be straight with you about all of it. Because I know how these stories are supposed to end, and mine doesn't end that way. She wrote me a letter. 3 pages. Her handwriting. Of course it was her handwriting, and it is not an apology. I've read it enough times to be sure. There's a line in the middle of it, and it's the truest thing my mother has ever put on paper. Truer than all 40 entries. I did what I thought was right for this family, and I'd do it again. And she would. That's not the part that keeps me up. Here's the part. She still doesn't understand what she wrote, even now. She thinks she lost on a technicality, that the judge read it wrong, that if she'd just explained it better they'd have seen. She does not understand. And I don't think she is capable of understanding. That there was nothing to explain. That a book of 40 kindnesses is a book of 40 kindnesses no matter how you read it. And that the only person who ever needed it explained was her. If you've listened this far, then somewhere in your life, there's a version of that book. And I want you to do one gentle thing with what you've heard. Stop trying to be believed by the person keeping it. You will not win by being reasonable with someone who's writing down your reasonableness as evidence. I gave back my key to prove I was safe, and it bought me nothing. Some people aren't keeping the book to find out the truth. They're keeping it to have the last word. And the only way to win is to make them read it out loud. Let me tell you the last part, because it's the only part that's mine, and it's quiet. And it's the reason I could finally tell you the rest. I still drive my father to dialysis. Mondays and Fridays. Danny does Wednesdays. Badly. There's no order anymore. No key. No reason I have to, and every reason a reasonable person would say I shouldn't. And I do it anyway. On my terms now. Which are these. I don't go in the house. I pull up at 5:45, and he comes out. And I hand him his thermos. Light. 2 sugars. And I drive him. And I pick him up. And I bring him home. And I don't go in. Doors. Not walls. I keep mine where I can see it. We don't talk much. We never did. But 2 Fridays ago, pulling out of the lot after, he was quiet a long time, watching the town go by with his big folded hands. And then he said, sideways, to the windshield. The way he says everything. He said, "You still keeping that little notebook? Your times and all?" And I said I was. And he said, "Good. Your mother." And he stopped. And he didn't finish it. My father has never once in his life finished a sentence about my mother, but he'd started one. And for my father, starting one is the Grand Canyon. And I reached over and I patted his big shaking hand on top of his dialysis bag. Twice. Gentle. The way she does. The way I can't help doing. And I said, "I know, Dad." And that was that. That was the whole thing. That's the fix. If you're waiting for a fix, a man who can't finish a sentence, and a daughter who finishes it for him, and lets him off. Because somebody in this family has to be the one who lets the other one off, and it was always going to be me. I kept the little spiral notebook. It's in my visor right now. My handwriting, his times, his weights, his pills, and I started a second one. I'll tell you this because I think you'll like it. I started driving 2 other people to that dialysis center. On the mornings I'm already there. An old man named Sal, whose kids are in Florida and never coming, who saves me the sports section and pretends he doesn't, and a woman named Deborah who's younger than me and scared. The way I'd be scared. The way you're allowed to be when somebody tells you what's about to happen to your body and then does it anyway. Nobody wrote it down. Nobody is keeping score. I just show up. Because it turns out that's the thing I actually am. The thing my mother spent 2 years documenting and never once recognized. I'm the one who shows up. She made a 40-page record of it. Sworn and sealed. She just filed it under the wrong crime. Blood. My mother used to tell me, is thicker than water. She said it my whole life, at every Thanksgiving. The year I didn't come. She said it the way people say a thing they've decided not to examine. But I've had a lot of quiet nights to examine it, and here's where I've landed. Blood isn't the people who share yours. Blood is the people who'd give you theirs and never once write it down. Family isn't who keeps a book on you. It's whoever's in the lot at 5:45 with the thermos already filled. Light. 2 sugars. Saying nothing. Asking nothing. Keeping the door where you can see it. Before I go, like this if it found you tonight, and share it with the one person in your life who's been made the villain for showing up, because they need to hear that the book gets read out loud in the end. And go put your entry 41 in the comments. I meant it. I'm counting. Not the way she counted. The other way. There's one more thing, and then I'll let you go. When Aunt Kath walked me out of that courtroom, she said something I haven't been able to put down. She said, "You know where your mother learned to keep a book like that, don't you, Meggie?" And I said no, and she got quiet. And she said, "There was a book kept about her once, a long time ago. Same handwriting'll do that to a person." And then she wouldn't say any more. But I've been thinking about it. A book kept about my mother, in whose hand? I think I know how to find out. And I think there is a whole other story sitting in a drawer in this family, one house back. And when I've read it, I'll tell you. Doors, not walls. Same chair next time.